Welcome back to the Hall of Sports podcast, and this is the next episode of the Rugby Room. Today I'm joined by Johnnie Hammond. How are you doing today, Johnny?
Yeah, we're very well, thank you. Yeah, the world finds itself in bizarre times, isn't it? But we're all up the same creek in the same vessel, so just got to keep paddling, really.
Yeah, absolutely. We were mentioned beforehand with the world being crazy. We even saw that kind of impact rugby this past weekend with the France and Scotland match being postponed. And luckily, I think it's being played on now March 26th. But what was your opinion when you were kind of seeing everything happen as it was, kind of day by day last week?
Look, I'll be brutally honest because that's the best way to be, right?
Yeah,
I just thought how typically French. But you can kind of see it dripping in with when the physios come on and the mask is over the mouth and over the nose, and it was a fantastic win in over Ireland. But to be celebrating in the change room, all linked arms in arms, and Sean Edwards is doing his thing on the bench down behind and what have you. But that's not socially distanced, and each country has their own protocols, so we don't quite know whether Fabien Galthié has adhered to the protocols of France. But Bernard Laporte, who is very, very close to Fabien Galthié, let's not forget that their careers been intertwined, has said he's done no wrong. But it just don't do it, Fabien, don't do it. And we can all make mistakes and what have you, but I think the same as any organization, if you're at the top, you have to set the tone. I was listening to another podcast today with Dan Carter, I think we might touch on later on, but he was talking about Richie McCaw, and the guy put on his life on hold, marriage, kids, all the rest of it, because he wanted to set the best example. And if you're at the very top, you've got to set the example. And what ramifications, what ripple effect that has through the France squad, I'm not sure, because they were flying, and it's a real shame. It's a real shame for France, their nation, who actually beginning to sort of enjoy watching their team play again, but also for the Six Nations itself, because I'm not always over impressed with the level of rugby in the Six Nations, but it started with some really intriguing games.
Yeah, it was one of those. I remember when I had the podcast last week. When I was talking to Rachel Burford, we're talking about how interesting it is to see first the England and Wales game, how that would go, and hopefully the France and Scotland game would go ahead. Because at that point, I think it was the day before everything, all the news came out, and it was one of those, as a neutral fan just watching the game, it would have been great to have both those games on last weekend. Because again, look, we have a little break now until kind of the next round of games, but it was one of those that you saw. Look, Scotland played very well against Wales and were excellent against England, and you really wanted to see how they do against the French team, who again will be looking to try and win the Grand Slam. I know Wales will have something to say about that as well.
Of course.
But it was disappointing that it does happen, and it just depends on it. Like you mentioned, it depends on each kind of country and how the leadership deals with it, and it's the way it is in sport now. The people at the head of each team really need to take onus of this. But you see all the other teams that they haven't had many cases, or if they do, it's making sure that they can get them isolated so it's not affecting the game. But unfortunately, that didn't happen with France, because we saw whatever it was, 9-10 players that caught COVID, and look, we don't know what the impact actually might that be in the next couple of games.
Yeah, and I think apart from that, there's some Marcosi where the guys and the girls and 15s and 7s all train. A wonderful facility. I was lucky enough to be down there in 2014 and actually stayed on site, which was dangerous because there was a bar at the bottom of the building. But it was a good tournament. We all had a great deal of fun. But they introduced the Sevens guys, who great news again. This week, HSBC Sevens World Series is back, which is brilliant. But they brought the Sevens guys into training, and that's crazy. Just stick to your rules. Of course, he wants to go and watch his son. You move heaven and earth to go and watch your son. But actually, there's things here that are bigger than far bigger than rugby, bigger than even sport. This is a global pandemic, and you've got to play your part. And Fabian didn't, and it's a real shame. And it's a real shame for the Scotland players as well, because they will now have to have some goodwill from the likes of Finn Russell at Racing and Stuart Hogg and what have you down at Exeter. Going to have a lot of goodwill from those clubs now to release them. It's quite big impact, like we saw with the Barbarians earlier in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. When we start looking at kind of the impact of COVID, and then to kind of the main point that I wanted to bring up at the start of the show today is I enjoyed the rugby getting to watch last weekend, the Super Rugby in New Zealand. You get to see all the fans back, and it just shows you, it gives you that little glimpse of what we're missing on kind of this side of the world right now. But just kind of watching the two games, obviously very high kind of scoring and high impact games, but that's kind of what we're working towards. And how good do you think it's been that, I know Super Rugby changed very quickly because of the pandemic, where you used to see all the teams from Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, and now we see this kind of round robin style for both Australia and New Zealand. How do you think that has worked over the past year?
It's like a lot of things at the moment. It's needs must, isn't it? And again, we'll may well touch on the Women's World Cup. I hope so. Yeah, it's need must. These decisions aren't being taken lightly, but it was needs must. And we may well have a theme running through this podcast. But again, I think it's about leadership, because actually these decisions, as we've seen in France, they're with sports ministers, they're with Macron, they're with prime minister. This is the level that these decisions are being made to up the chain now. So Jacinda Ardern, who we're trying to get on my podcast, the Women's Rugby Pod, who's an absolutely lovely cabinet office chap that I keep speaking to, is absolutely delightful chap. But that's the level that these things are going to, and for them to say, right, bang, we can actually close our borders geographically. Of course, it's incredibly so much simpler than other places. Okay, we're an island, but we're right in the middle of the world in an essential hot. But to be able to close the borders and say, do you know what, we can let some fans in, we can actually play some rugby. So important for their mental health down there, which again is a huge factor in the global pandemic. That's their national sport. To see footy, as they would call it, being played down there. It was a really, really, really boost. And actually it came as a big boost, for me personally, actually seeing fans in there, watching the rugby, and great to see Super Rugby back last weekend. Crusaders doing what the Crusaders do, class shining through at the end. But really great. And we could discuss probably all day long the merits of Super Rugby against Southern Hemisphere Rugby against Northern Hemisphere Rugby, or in particular Australasian Rugby against Northern Hemisphere Rugby. But the skill level's great, isn't it? And there's passion and there's flair, and they're athletes, and they're power athletes. They're not gym monkeys, and there's a big distinction. And very, very luckily, having seen it firsthand in how that they prepare. That gym work is not about putting on bulk, not about putting on size. It's about putting on power and making the best of the frame of the athletic build that you have. So no, it was great to see it back, and it's as quite often New Zealand leading the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said there is, for anybody that doesn't watch Super Rugby and they tune in because they want to see a game with all the fans in the stands, and kind of, it's really, really good to see, because like you said, there's power, there's athleticism. It's really, you look at pretty much any of the backs from the teams that we saw at the weekend, and it's pace, it's power, it's creativity as well in terms of the attack, and it's really good to see. And we got to see a lot of really good performances. Look, I guess the first one obviously to look at is kind of that Crusaders and Highlanders game. What can you say, Chris? Like you said, Crusaders doing what the Crusaders do. They know how to win, and they know how to win in style.
Yeah, 100%. And it's they're a quality side. It's Leicester used to do it, didn't they? Bath in back in the day, you're probably a little too young to remember those days. But Munster used to steamroll teams and win ugly, and now Leinster have taken up the mantle over in Ireland, and over here Saracens used to kind of be there as well. They just got over the line. There's something within them. There's Scott Robertson, I think, is a tremendous coach, and all you hear is he's a people person. I had lucky enough to have a couple of drinks with him, and he's loose. Don't get me wrong, he's loose. Likes a beer, but it makes him human, and he's got really high standards. And you're never bigger than the shirt, and we know how humble New Zealanders are, and especially New Zealand rugby players. But the Cantabrians as well. It's so in their DNA. Again, the AMI Stadium that was built in 92 days after the earthquake in can't remember. I can't remember. I was down there for the Ireland tests, and to have rugby back that day, the atmosphere when the teams ran out. I mean, apart from the fact it was -6 and things have retreated into my body that I didn't realise possible. But I've only been in tears twice in commentary, and that was one of them. The atmosphere was absolutely electric, and when you have that, when you go and buy a pint of milk, or you're going to have your car washed, or whatever it may be, and everybody's rooting for you, or giving you some feedback and what have you, there's a huge ownership on you. You feel you're representing not only the shirt, but the whole area and Christchurch itself. So they do what they do, but there's a huge amount of class there. They've got a great academy, and they just keep churning them out, don't they?
Absolutely. You look at any of the games over there, and like you said, if you haven't been following Super Rugby for a while, you'll see a big change in some of the players. But you look at like we said earlier, they're athletes, and it's not so much what we see kind of over here, where, like you said, they're kind of, even what players are trying to bulk up over here is completely different than what we see when we watch Super Rugby. You're looking at this, like you said earlier, power and athleticism, and it makes for really good viewing. It's one of those that when you watch those games, and the two games of the weekend are a perfect example, and it's just creative and flair rugby where you're going to get some really nice scores, and we don't get that enough here. Look, as a Leinster fan myself, I see us winning the majority of games, and you see the way they can do it, but then you actually look at Super Rugby and the way some of the teams win, it's at a completely different level. Yeah,
I think again, I keep harping on, but again, I've been lucky enough to be down in New Zealand a couple of times on tours doing the commentary, and again, very lucky to go watch these teams train, and having been in most teams are certainly around Europe, and a lot of international teams being in their training session. Ted wouldn't let us in for too much of Steve Hansen wouldn't let us in for too much of his training session, but you got to see a bit. But it was allowed in a full session of the New Zealand Māori, and 99% of their training session, and I kid you not, was play defence, you're in defence, and then a coach will just throw a ball. Right, you're in attack. Do it. And because they wake up, they're born with a rugby ball in hand. Dan Carter, with his dad telling him to kick off both feet all the time, and he's got the post in the back of the garden. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I've got posts in the back of my garden, but it's a national sport, and everybody wants to be an All Black, and therefore you have incredibly high skill levels. The school rugby, you've seen the Harkers, the Auckland Grammar, and what have you, and the incredible level of that. And therefore, you're constantly aspiring and constantly trying to get better and better and better. And the pyramid is very, very good in New Zealand in terms to get to the All Blacks. The structure in which they do it is very, very good. But it's put down to skill and mental, physical and mental agility. You contrast that with, dare I say it, an England side at the moment who can't seem to find a plan B unless the coach is telling them what to do. And you don't see that in New Zealand. You don't see that many New Zealand teams. So if you're getting smacked up front, you do something different. And that would go hark back to the Crusaders. They have that ability to go to A to B to C to D, back to A if they need, like no other team that possibly that are in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those, you do see that kind of difference where there's a lot of teams that you look at that are really good. Like we even look at the England side over the last couple of years, and they've been phenomenal. But like you said, it's when they need to do something different, it's kind of coming from the coaching rather than when you look at some of the Super Rugby and something's not working and something happens. It's like instincts that players know that they need to do something a little bit different. But it seems like there are some players that you watch kind of on a weekly basis in kind of European rugby, and it seems like it's very structured, it's very to the plan, and there's no kind of off the cuff that we do see a lot in Super Rugby. And it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people enjoy watching it so much, because there's a lot of attacking rugby. I want to kind of go back to what you were saying, where one of the best kind of times that you had to commentate in the game was over when you look over into New Zealand. Is there any other moments that when you're in commentary that you would step back and just were thinking like how great it is to actually be able to be here and to commentate on this particular game?
No, this is going to sound incredibly cheesy, but I have a kind of 10-second countdown ritual in my head. And then the last thing I do is take 3 deep breaths. Best advice to give anyone who's talking rubbish on a microphone. But yeah, in that 10 seconds, I'd always think, what a privilege to be here. And that could be, one of my early games, so that be Lancashire against Devon in a county final, Army and Navy 2, a World Cup final in 2014, or Wales against New Zealand, or England against All Blacks at Twickenham, whatever it may be. No, incredibly privileged to be there. I think another one game that I did think, wow, truly special to be part of it, was a Munster game, Munster-Toulouse, and my old chum Colin Derek Morris, or Dowie Morris as you know him, was sat beside me, and Munster scored, and they'd been under a huge amount of pressure, and they scored within about the first couple of minutes. And at Thomond Park, you are right in the crowd, and boy, the looks you get when you're possibly just speaking like this, when Ronan's lining up a kick, and the looks and all the rest of it, just doing my job. But they scored, and the place went absolutely off. The pressure cooker just went poof, and the emotion just looked over to Dowie, and he's got a tear in his eye, and I've got wet eyes, and it was just a magical moment. It really was. But no, I think probably 2014, the World Cup final when England women beat Canada in the final. And I've been a big advocate of women's rugby for a long time, and commentator on most of England's games leading into that World Cup for the kind of 4 years leading up into it. So they're an incredible, accessible bunch, incredible, friendly bunch, and therefore you felt a little bit a sort of part of that journey. Alongside Sue Day, who again a marvelous broadcaster and tremendous administrator within the game now as well. She's not only CEO but CFO of the RFU. Just have the 2 roles. Yeah. If anyone could do it, Daisy can do it. But and she's just she went, and it was incredibly emotional. So yeah, that one probably sticks out. England Barbarians, Chris Ashton's hat-trick for the Barbarians when they scored stupid amount of tries, and Semi Ranjara was running around, and Ashton, my 2 boys sat behind me, and that fact he was my last game while I was at Sky Sports. So yeah, that's another one that was pretty good, because there's some unbelievable rugby. But no, genuinely, from championship to sevens to whatever, always felt very, very privileged to be telling part of the story.
Yeah, I kind of want to touch on when you were talking there about the women's rugby, because I know we got a bit of news this week in terms of the World Cup that got postponed by a year. I guess what was your first reaction to it? Because I know there was a lot of teams that were kind of ramping up their preparation in for that. So what was your kind of first kind of impression when you heard the news? Because I know there was a lot of kind of talk for about a week prior that there was the possibility that World Rugby had kind of put in that it should be postponed. But again, I think I was looking all over social media the day that it was announced, and there was a lot of diverse opinions on it, should we say.
Are we past the watershed for my initial reaction? No, it was I was gutted because for lots of different reasons, for lots of personal and for sort of work wise and what have you, and the fact that it's New Zealand and it was going to be a World Cup and it was going to be great on a very, very selfish level. But you then soon step back and say, oh, the players. We're talking about it January, February, and it's September. These guys have been doing it for 4 years, the last 3.5 years. And wow, the sacrifices, basically amateurs, 99% of them, or 95% of them, the sacrifices they make that you see firsthand. So the heart went straight out to the players, and I picked up the phone and spoke to a couple of players, and lucky enough to speak to Sarah Hunter. She was very, very surprised. But now the dust has settled, you settled slightly. Certainly felt it was coming. Speaking to a couple of people, Katie Sadley, I spoke to a couple of weeks before. She's the head of women's rugby for World Rugby, and there was just a personal chat, and we were just talking about it kind of off the record, and it was just backing up too much. Those qualifiers, they were talking about playing them in UAE and people coming over, flying over from there, and we have a sevens tournament, the first sevens tournament, Madrid. Well, France pull out, and then USA pull out, and that's just the first attempt at it, and it was all just backing up too much. And another big part of it was the finances, because you're going to have to quarantine all those amateur people for 6, 7, 8 weeks. Are you going to get your best players? Because that's a hell of an ask. I'm going over to do the Para Sevens. I've got to go there Monday to then commentate Saturday, Sunday. That's quite a big
ask.
It's quite a big ask. It imposes a lot on family life and what have you. These guys have got other jobs, and to ask employees or families or the rest of it to absorb that themselves as well. That's a huge ask. To not have fans, to just have New Zealand fans. And I know they would have done it very well, but the New Zealand government didn't come up with enough money, and therefore World Rugby and NZRU couldn't fill that gap as well. So that was a big part of the decision. But look, I think it's a really good thing, because I'm a big one for, if you're going to do it properly, and it wasn't going to be proper because New Zealand had an actual advantage. They did anyway because they're at home, but they've only got their fans and they haven't had to quarantine, or then you've got to talk about, would they quarantine for 2 weeks and be the same as everyone else? And it was just it was getting too much. So let's do it when we can all get out there. There can be great fans. It can be a proper showpiece for the world to see what an incredible product that the women's game is. And I truly, genuinely believe that. If you haven't watched it and watch 5 or 10 minutes of it. You can watch it most weekends on a streamed games. It's fabulous, and let's showcase that in the best possible light. And we've got another year to try and tie things together, smash it against a brick wall, which is kind of my life, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually talking about this same kind of topic with Rachel last week, about in terms of the Six Nations and getting, when that got kind of pushed back to April, how maybe it gives people more of that chance to watch it. Because I know, as from being over here in Ireland, that during the Six Nations that you'd always have the under-20s on the Friday night, then you'd be expected to see either the Saturday and the Sunday. And if Ireland were playing on the Sunday, you'd probably have the women's playing at maybe lunchtime on the Sunday or the Saturday, where there's not as many eyes on it now. but with everybody being at home during COVID, for this to be kind of postponed, which look, I think was the right decision to give every team ample time to prepare as well for the tournament. It can only be a good thing now. What I'm hoping is that it doesn't get postponed again, and it does take place in April, because we've seen, like you said, even just with the Madrid Sevens, that you saw the likes of France and pull out. You'd hope that by the time the Six Nations comes around, something like that wouldn't happen, and they'd get to have a fairly seamless tournament. Look, we've seen it even with the men's that no matter what you do, something can happen if one team isn't preparing properly. It can kind of leave the rest of the tournament in havoc. But hopefully we get to see that. And it goes to your point that it's important that people actually do go and watch, because the quality of rugby is actually really, really good.
Yeah, it is. Everything's crossed. Genuinely, everything's crossed. Yeah, I think there's a couple of points there that I know there's been quite a strong. Well, the blokes are there and the women are there. Yeah, and I understand that, but let's not turn this into a sexist row. And I'm a bloke hugely heavily involved in the women's game, so I kind of don't need to quantify kind of myself, but it is where it is. Now, people who get paid a hell of a lot more than me can decide not to do that. And I have a very close working relationship with the RFU and Nikki Ponsford, who heads up the women's program there. And they are really pushing everything. But when you're getting paid £18,000 for a match bonus for a chap and for one game, and that's probably a year's salary for a female player. And it takes 3 times to go to the boards to get them to vote just to pay the England women. And we're talking in the last 5 years, had to go to the board 3 times. There's big changes that massively need to happen, 100%. But we are where we are. You can't expect amateurs and ladies with jobs or kids or families or whatever to make those kind of sacrifices. It's just not fair. And let's put it on at the right time. I desperately hope the Six Nations goes ahead, and I'm really, really pleased. Slight trepidation, because again I work quite closely with the Women's Six Nations, or I certainly try to, because I think everything in rugby needs a lot more tying up now. The men's game, that's probably a lost cause. That boat has probably sailed, and I'm not sure you're ever going to gain it back. But women's rugby, because it's in its infancy, has a chance to go, we don't have to do stuff like the blokes. In fact, let's not do stuff like the blokes. Why can't you do something different with the Six Nations? Why can't you have a Thursday night? Why can't you have a Friday night? Why can't you do something different? Invite all the local schools. Why can't you insist on sponsorship being the same for the men as it is the women? You can only sponsor the women if you sponsor the men. There's so many different bits that you can do, but I feel very, very strongly that women's rugby doesn't have to follow the men's path. And in fact, let's please not, because the mess that the men's rugby has got itself into, just take, for example, my kind of line of work of broadcasting. What's it, 6, 8 different broadcasters now?
Yeah.
To watch the rugby around the world? Oh, that's bonkers. Yeah, you switch on to ITV. Oh no, it's on. It's being streamed on Rugby Pass. Oh no, it's on BBC. Yeah, it's crazy, and I'm not saying that that it should all be in one place, but that's really, really crazy, and therefore that manifests itself out in broadcasters and what have you. And with the women's, let's do it differently. Get a broadcaster, tie in the people that are doing some good stuff around it. There's lots of volunteers and people like myself doing podcasts and stuff that help the women's game. Try to join it up. Try to hit it all together as an arrowhead, so that actually you're making far more impression than individual spikes here and there. And I've spent a lot of time the last 2 years trying to do that. For the majority, quite unsuccessfully, unfortunately. But it has a great opportunity in Women's Six Nations to stand alone and show exactly what it can do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, it's one of those that I think what you said at the start is, for anyone that hasn't seen it, just to, when the Six Nations comes along, give one of the games at least a chance, and just because personally for me, look, I think I'm a little bit different than others. That I'm just a sports junkie that I'll watch whatever comes on, and especially when it comes to rugby, if it's on TV, I'm watching it. But for anybody that look, I think this is a perfect year for people to kind of try it out and to watch, because people are stuck at home anyway, and as I said, and you said it before, that there is a good quality there, and considering that these girls are basically amateurs, it's very impressive, and it's something that I think there can be stuff that's done that's different than the men's. Because look, the amount of people that complain about some of the men's competitions, like I think the amount of people that you see complain about the Six Nations, how it's gone stale and things like that, and that's not what you want to see in a sport for women's rugby that is in its infancy. Try and do something different that might attract some people into the sport as well. It's a really interesting story, and like I said, hopefully it can stay and go ahead when they're planning it, and then next year, obviously with the World Cup in New Zealand, hopefully we'll be a little bit back to normal, so fans can get back and we can start watching games in stadiums again, because I think that's one thing that a lot of people miss, that we're consuming so much at home now that I think people would do anything just to be able to go to one of these games again.
What is this 3D thing you've got in front of me? I only deal in 2D nowadays, don't we? Everything's on a screen nowadays. Like, oh, go to a rugby game where everyone quite know what to do with themselves. No, I agree. It makes a massive difference. There's talk of the Lions tour and the whole touring aspect of that, the crowd and what have you. The crowd make a massive difference. Make no bones about it, to players, to officials, to spectators, to absolutely everyone. And the sooner we can safely and correctly do that, the better for everybody. And let's hope we can do that. Certainly, as a broadcaster, certainly I hope to get to some of those Six Nations games, and I will certainly be looking forward to getting down to New Zealand and enjoying that tournament when it does happen.
Absolutely. I guess one thing to kind of talk about now is some of the games that we did get at the weekend in the Six Nations. And look, I don't think there's anywhere else that we can start but the Wales and England game. Look, we'll talk about kind of the elephant in the room at the moment, where it's the decisions from the referee. Where, look, as a neutral, and I was going in expecting England to win the game, because you look at the two teams, and Wales hadn't performed too well. They got a lot of players back from injury and other things, but I still expected England to kind of push on. But you have to admit, those first two tries must have been a real kick in the teeth for England, with just the way that they were scored.
Yeah. I mean, I'm half Welsh, half English, so I'm kind of.
You're fine.
I'm kind of okay. But I do a bit of coaching, and I cannot stand abuse of officials in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think you can ever blame a referee for a result. Now, if any England fans, or certainly not the camp or Eddie Jones or Owen Farrell or anyone else, are blaming Pascal Gauzet for the result, you do the maths that rugby doesn't work like that. It's shifts of momentum, swings and roundabouts, dips and peaks and troughs. That's the game of rugby. So it doesn't work like that. But England made enough mistakes of their own without having to blame the referee. Simple as that. You cannot have a penalty count the way that you do, and you still can't get to a stage, if you're England, where plan A is not working or Wales aren't quite doing what you thought. Scotland did it back at Twickenham. Wales, was it last year? England have come up against this. South Africa, they've come up against this, where the opposition possibly aren't quite doing exactly what they want. And for all the intense training sessions that Eddie Jones does, I think there's a culture issue within England, and it's about an environment. And this is a really waffly answer, but I think it's an important point. And I genuinely believe that James Haskell talks about waiting for Eddie Jones to blow his gasket. He never did. But if you're always waiting for that, if you're a little kid, you're always waiting for your parent to, kick your ass or whatever, verbally, obviously. It's illegal in Scotland now to hit a child, of course, as my kids keep reminding me. Little buggers. But you're in that constant fear. You're just second edging yourself all the time. These are professional, wonderful, talented players. If you're in that kind of environment, you're on the field, you don't want to make those mistakes because you're going to get your knuckles wrapped, or is he actually going to blow his top this time? And don't get me wrong, I think Eddie Jones is a very, very good coach. I think he has a very short shelf life as a coach, and I feared when they took him on again. I think he's fabulous for the first couple of years. Talking to lots of coaches he's worked with before, like Alex Sanderson and stuff. Alex Sanderson allegedly was touted. Eddie Jones wanted him in England. He said, "There's no way that I've got to work with Eddie." So it's just too intense. And for a short period of time, that's absolutely fine. In England, as you say, we're flying. But I think it's kind of quite dictatorial, and Owen's a very, very dominant character. And again, who's going to tell Owen Farrell, mate, stop talking to the referee like that? Marrow, just back off, mate. Stop giving so many penalties away. All it took was somebody to put their foot on the ball and go, guys, don't compete for a ruck for 5 minutes. Change the picture for the referee. I'd expect my under-12 side to do that. We're talking about England. For me, that's really, really worrying. The fact that they can't think of that. Ben Young's got 100-odd caps, 103, 106 caps. That's the most experienced England side of all time. And somebody can't put their foot on the ball and go, let's change this. This isn't working. Because we've got under his skin. Let's change it. Jason Leonard, World Cup final. Comes on, has a little word with Andre Watson, changes the picture at the scrum time for him, because that's when England were getting pinged. Changes the perception, and that's all it takes. And that's such fine margins that top level sports on, and our great game as well. So I think it's worrying for England whether we now see a bit of a wholesale change. That World Cup cycle comes a little bit earlier than Eddie was possibly hoping. I think he was sort of planning to do that in the summer. Whether he starts to do that now, but I do think selection is still, it's the one thing you've got to get right. The first thing you've got to get right as a coach, and I'm not sure Eddie does that quite a lot of the time.
Yeah, I guess the two things that kind of pop up into my head when you kind of mention some of those points. I guess one is you have all these players with so many caps. Do you think that maybe that starting team lacks that actual leadership when things are going against them? Because look, a lot of those players are used to winning, and when someone who's used to winning and hasn't really tasted lots of defeats and what happens and what somebody needs to step up, you look at some of the past greats, and look, the person I always think of is probably Richie McCaw, where when things don't go too well for New Zealand, even though they wouldn't lose too much, that he was always one to kind of get the players in and make sure that they know exactly what they need to do. And then I guess the second point is we mentioned about selection, we mentioned about Eddie Jones. This is his 6th season now with England. Is when does it get to the point that maybe does it get a bit stale, and if it's the same message the whole time from the same coaching staff, or maybe it's the same players? When does some form of change need to take place?
So to talk about the first point, but when you look at Richie McCaw, who was alongside him, Kano was normally alongside him.
Yeah,
the Alami was normally up front. Woodcock, Adam Whitelock in that, in the second row. Carter behind, Conrad Smith. So in their individual areas, 2003 World Cup winning sides, you've got Greenwood, Back, Delalio, Johnson, Leonard, Dawson, Wilkinson, all in their areas, leaders. And I think, again, that's what England lacks. Ben Young's a fine scrum half. But he's not that kind of character. He isn't. He's quite softly spoken, gets his message across, absolutely. But he's not a leader. And then you have the access of the rugby league boys who grew up in close proximity and are very good friends, and are Eddie Jones's trusted lieutenants. Nobody else is going to look in. Like for Joe Schmidt, Johnny Sexton was his man on the field. You quite often get that with coaches, and especially 10s. I think it needs to lead kind of seamlessly into your second point. I think it takes a shake-up. You're not telling me that first weekend, they're not playing for 8-9 weeks, whatever it was for the Saracens guys, that training is good enough and what have you. Every single player, hand on heart, will tell you training is one thing, a match is completely, really different, let alone a test match, the opening game of the Six Nations. You look at that Wales game, Elliot Daly is one of the finest footballers we have in the country. He drops the ball 3 times. That's not Elliot Daly. He's rusty. He is rusty. And it's not like you don't have other options. Now, I know that the squad is small and tight. It's 28 man squad, isn't it? But Ollie Lawrence is shipped in, shipped out. If you want to play Owen Farrell because he's your leader and he's your captain and all the rest of it, give yourself a security blanket, play him at 12, have George Ford at 10. Because if Owen does have a poor day, George is taking a lot of that responsibility off him. Henry Slade outside. Whereas if he's at 10, if you pull him off for 40 minutes, he's pulled right front. So you're hedging your bets. And Billy's not playing well. He knows that. He needs some game time. He needs to constantly play. He's only played 3 times. So I think that selection has been wrong. And I think it's interesting for Eddie now. I think he has to either change and pick a few guys on form. It's not difficult to look at the Simmons brothers down at Exeter, to look at the likes of Don Brandt, these kind of players. Someone like Ollie Devoto, I think, is a cracking player, a 12. We England haven't really had a 12 since Will Greenwood went. Need to fill that position. Personally, I'd like to see Henry Slade at 12. I think he's got all the attributes. Why ever not? So I think he's got a real chance that either he sticks with his players, and as you know, Eddie doesn't care a great deal for what the likes of you and I and the rest of the media say about it, and he'll get more and more stubborn and what have you. But I think he does need to change things up, and I think to freshen things up is a part of your question. He does that with his coaches for whatever reasons, and we may have touched on them earlier. The fact that they just get spent. But I think he needs that with his players as well. And I think he needs a little bit of youth in there. And Pablo Dogu, let's see him. Now, you lose to Scotland, you've got to go to Italy and win. And therefore, you put all your chips in one thing. You're tried and tested in your trusted guys. I get that as a coach. You've got players you trust and players you possibly don't trust so much. I get that. But I think at some point he's got to double down and actually go, okay, well, let's pick a few younger guys to freshen things up. Guys who are on form. Marcus Smith. We've got to see that guy in an English shirt too.
Yeah, that was the one surprising thing that I had coming into it, because as an Irish fan, I actually expected some of the changes to happen this year just because of, we said before, Saracens hadn't played in a while, so the players were rusty, and it was maybe a perfect chance. I think of this again now, it's you have this break now where you can kind of decide what you want to do, but what do they have to lose at the moment? Like, you've now lost 2 games, so you're not going to win the championship. I feel the same way with Ireland now, and it's one of the things that kind of annoys me a little bit as a fan, that you'd want to see some players being given an opportunity, considering when you lose your first 2 games of the Six Nations, you're not going to win it anyway. So it's a great chance to kind of blood in 1 or 2 players. I see the Ireland scenario similar enough to England in terms of there's that complete trust in your 10. So you have Owen Farrell for England, you have Johnny Sexton for Ireland, and you need to have that plan for when either in Farrell's case it's not working, or in Sexton's case that he signed a new 1-year deal with the IRFU this week, but there has to be a plan after that. And we've seen different players like Ross Burns come in, we've seen Billy Burns, and there's been a lot of talk between those. I know there's been a lot of kind of high profile media members out there that want to see Harry Byrne being given a chance. But look, when you only play a couple of games for your club, you need to get a little bit back. I know Joey Carberry played his first game back just last week for Munster. So it goes with that point is, do you think some of the coaches now at kind of the top level maybe trust that their ideal starting 15 a bit too much and don't actually pick based on how the players are actually performing for club and country?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think we also have to realise that these are incredibly high pressure jobs, and that they are under a huge amount of pressure. And we all call for development. Oh, why don't you have a look at him? And da da da. I've been lucky to talk to some good coaches, and I particularly remember I'll say a glass, just because he's going to be coaching the Lions this summer, but it may well have been more than a couple of glasses of reds with Gats and talking about Welsh rugby. And he had to trust the players that he trusted. He had to bring in some of the youngsters that he did, the George Norths, the Lee Halfpennies and Sam Warburton, because there wasn't anything else. Now, that's just a bloody lucky break, and he admitted himself, that's a really lucky break. But again, with Andy Farrell here, he didn't have Joey Carberry, and I think most people in I were probably saying that Carberry under Johnny in all those training sessions, learning off him the whole time, and then when Johnny does, isn't at that kind of level, and he will be the first one to admit when he's not. That's the kind of character he is. Then Joey Carberry steps straight into that. He's just had a horrific injury. So there are so many different factors within this. Are coaches sticking to their tried and tested? Yes, because I think you because that's what you do, because you've got to trust the guys going out there completely. And a rugby squad and team is no different to a group of people in society or a group of mates down the pub. You're going to click with certain people better than others, and consciously or subconsciously, that plays into that they're humans, and it's everything in life is about human beings. That does come into it, and trusting people to do what you want them to do on the field is a big thing. And then you get scared, and then you go, oh well, I can't lose, so I've got to put those people I really, really trust. Oh, it's the same guys. Well, and so the cycle, continues. I think someone like Wayne Pivac in Wales, has showed a few times bring back someone like Dan Lydiot because he felt he was missing out from his squad. Poor Lyd, injured within minutes of getting back, absolutely gutted. He can spend a lot more time on his tractors now, but also picking someone like Rhys Samet, quite clearly got the quality, but doesn't always work. Wales have had their fair share of 2 or 3 wingers. I can remember the last 10 years, although their names escaped me, had 1 or 2 caps, never saw them again. But he saw the quality, put them in there. So I think some coaches do rely on it a little bit more. Some coaches don't rely on it. But I think it's human nature to go with the people that the way that they work. It's easier for you as a coach, and no coach would admit he does stuff or she does stuff to make it easy. But I think subconsciously that you do, and you go, if it's a 50-50 call, you go for the person you trust.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very interesting watching the Ireland and Italy game, because obviously you expect to win, but it was the first time in, I can't remember how long they said that the whole back line for Ireland came from Leinster, and it was one of those that I think maybe it was needed at that time just to get kind of that continuity back. So there's been a lot of questions, and over here anyway, about the attack, because in the first 2 games of the Six Nations, look, the game against Wales, it's hard when you get a sending off in the first kind of 20 minutes of the game, but it looked it lacked creativity, and it lacked kind of what we saw under Joe Schmidt, where there was many different facets of how you're going to attack a team. But then we started to see a more expansive game against Italy, which it just didn't look like those periods of possession were happening in the first two games. So do you think it's just one of those things that when you do have to look, Mike Catt has just come in and it takes time. Obviously, it hasn't been ideal with COVID. You haven't been able to be around the players. How long do you think it really takes for a new kind of system to really take shape, especially at the international level? Because look, we know it can happen a bit quicker with club level because you're with the players pretty much every single day, which internationally it's a lot harder. You only have them for specific weeks of the year.
Yeah, I think it's it's a crucial point, isn't it? The fact that if you're a club coach, as you say, you're there all day, every day. Now, an international coach, of course, will be across his players and communicate with their players a huge amount, especially the leaders in the squad. But you've only got limited time with them. But what we're talking with Ireland, or certainly how I see it, is you are going from one end of the spectrum to completely the other end of the spectrum. I understand from a few players in that World Cup camp in Ireland, it just got too much. Yeah, it's almost that beautiful minds or whatever it was with the numbers, and the detail got too much, and it became claustrophobic. And you've got to be in the right place mentally to play rugby. And the guys weren't there, so I think Andy Farrell saw that, and I understand there's a lot of things around the squad have changed and how they operate around each other. Of course, COVID, but just again, we spoke earlier about creating an environment where people are happy to talk and to challenge and what have you. I'm not sure that's the case within England, but I understand that's far more the case now with Ireland, that people can speak and say, well, hang on, why are we doing that? Or what's this quite about? Because, that's important. If you understand something, you're going to do it a lot better. But that's a big sea change. And Joe was there for a long time. And, a lot of those players have moved along, but it's almost like a coffee stain on a white tablecloth, isn't it? You've got to wash it a fair few times to get that stubborn stain out. And I think it's the same with the new management style coming in. It's going to take a long time. How long? We don't know. But I genuinely thought, and again, there's lots of different factors. Well, this is rugby. It's complicated. Was it the fact that it was Ireland? But I just saw the shape of the attack just slightly different. Just forwards, just tipping off a little bit more, just changing their point of attack, just that ball given, to use layman terms, just a little bit more air, just a little bit more freedom, just to push it away from that first receiver and have the confidence to do that. And I think that's the way that Ireland will begin to play. I think they've been unlucky with some injuries, but I genuinely think the attack is coming. I think you make an interesting point. About Mike Catt. I know there's a little bit been spoken about him and written about him. Yeah, I think the jury's still out. A wonderful player and footballer that he was. That doesn't always translate to being a great coach. Absolutely not. But he was a talented footballer. But we haven't seen, whether that be from Italy or from Ireland, just anything that Mike Catt is putting his stamp on. And he was the innovator, bones about it. In 2003, he was the innovator, and the guy, let's try this, and that energy and what have you, and he had that footballing ability and crashing it up against Wales, that semi-final, whatever it was. He could do all those things. So he's a wonderful player. Is he translating into coaching? Let's give them some more time. Don't forget Wayne Pivac, back end of last year. That was it. He was gone. Everybody's calling for his head. We're 2-3 games in the Six Nations now, and Wayne Pivac's, the new Warren Gatland, he's about to win a Grand Slam. That's how fickle we are in the media, isn't it? But just give Andy Farrell some time. Give anybody some time. Crumbs, do anybody else in any other line of work? Do you hit the ground running? Probably not. It's going to take you some time to adjust. I mean, you've got so many moving parts that rugby is, 15 of them most of the time. It is like herding cats. So we'll go back to Joe Smith now, but no, it is complicated. So no, I'd like to see more from Ireland because, Robbie Henshaw, he's an amazing form. Gary Ringrose is a quality, fabulous centre. Jordan Lamore, you got Keenan, Keith Earl, Stockdale. Yes, some fabulous players out there. I personally like to see a bit of John Cooney would be an addition I'd quite like to see. There's some. You've got all the tools there, isn't he, Mike Catt? He's got all the tools there. Johnny Sexton's got all the tools there, but they just need to learn where to bring the right tools out. There's a bunch of players they need to be able to learn where to do that, and obviously Mike needs to help them do that.
Yeah, I think that's where kind of the biggest kind of gripe has come in. That you look at some of the players, and we've looked at the likes of Henshaw, Ringrose. You even look at James Lowe, who's come in. There's a lot of quality there, and the fact that they didn't really get much out of them in those first 2 games, I think that's where most of the questions came in. And there'll be a lot going out there when you do have to play against England, and you have to play against Scotland as well. If you don't see a little bit more, the pressure will just kind of ramp up with the way it goes. I guess a good way to kind of end the podcast is some big news happened last week, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. But Dan Carter, his retirement from rugby, and personally, he was one of my favorite players, kind of watching as that kind of number 10, because it was almost like anytime you saw him, he was going to take a kick. It's automatic. He's going to score, and it was just his work ethic. And I listened to his podcast that he did just recently as well, and some of the things that he mentions, it just shows you what a true professional is in the game. And we talk about those leaders in that New Zealand team, and he was absolutely one of them. And it's hard to find someone who was as good as he was in that position. I think there was this mystique after the 2003 World Cup around Johnny Wilkinson, and I feel you had that same kind of mystique around Dan Carter with the way he kind of performed for the last number of years.
The best for me.
Yeah.
With no real equal. He's one of those guys or girls at school who was probably rugby captain or hockey captain, but they're also captain of the chess team, and they're also the swimming team, and they did the opening solo at the Christmas Carol concert. They could literally do everything, and that's Dan Carter. Like, genuinely a wonderful rugby player. Nothing the guy couldn't do. 2005 Lions. Just not sure I've seen a more complete performance. Absolutely unbelievable player, but a great human being as well. Annoyingly so. He's good looking. His wife's lovely. But no, in all seriousness, the best I've seen and commentated on as a 10 had absolutely everything. Both feet. One slightly weaker, but both feet. The ability to run, to change pace, had wonderful balance. Wonderful drive, and his professionalism to stay at the top and have the injuries that he did, and to have that burning desire to win that World Cup when it had been so cruelly taken away from certainly 4 years before, was brilliant. I just, if I may, just tell you one story about Dan Carter. I was down, I think it was Waikato. My friend Jimmy Gemmell will hate me saying Waikato, or however they say it. Stacey Flula taught me how to say it once, and I've forgotten. But anyway. And he wasn't playing, and it was Quinny and I, Alan Quinlan. He's a guy to go on tour with. And Dan Carter was there, and we had a quick chat before the game. And I've been lucky enough to be in the company of some greats, and you get used to that kind of thing. And we had a really, really nice chat, and he just couldn't stop asking question after question after question after question. And then after the game, we finished the game, and I'd just done the post-match interviews. And I just came out the back of the stadium, and who's there lugging the physio beds and the kit bags into the bus? It's Dan Carter. And there's nobody around. There's no cameras, and it was just it was almost sort of in the darkness. The bus was backed up in a sort of corner of the car park, and it was in darkness. And he's doing that because he knows that's the right thing to do, and that's the kind of guy he was. And I think the yin and the yang between him and Richie was fabulous for New Zealand. And then you add in the likes of Kano and Conrad Smith and Ma'anonu and these kind of guys, Ali Williams in the early days, and Kano and all the rest of it, and Mia Lamu. Some wonderful players. You've always got to be lucky with the team that you're in. And I think he's a Kiwi, so your luck's normally on your side if you're in a good team. Yeah. But no, a wonderful player. That's certainly the best fly half I've commentated on in the men's game.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, I completely agree. And the one thing that kind of stuck out to me about Dan Carter is every time New Zealand played in Ireland, you would always see him at doing some sort of initiative with one of the local rugby clubs with some of the kids. And it's something that you didn't see too often. Like when a lot of the other big teams would come over, they stay in the hotel, they play the game, they go. But he was one that really did get involved, even when he was only here for a short period of time. And it goes to that point that the person was as good as the player, and you don't often see that. And it's always good to be able to kind of celebrate that when the career is over. And like you said, it was great for him to be able to go back after that the World Cup was kind of taken from him because of injury. And I think a lot of fans just in general were happy to see him be successful in that next World Cup, because it was something that we all had waited for, because he was so good. He was on such a high level, both for club and country, to see him actually go there and be able to win. It is something special. I just wanted to kind of finish off with saying thanks for joining me today, Johnny. And also, is there anywhere that people can kind of find some of your work? I know that you host a podcast as well for the women's game.
Yep. Yes, I host the Women's Rugby Pod with your guest previously, Rachel Burford. All across social medias, at Pod Women's Rugby. Just had to think then, because Burf normally does that bit. I'm on social media as well, at Johnnie Hammond, Johnnie Hammond Rugby on Instagram. I commentate. I'm sort of moving slightly more into sort of trying to coordinate those kind of things, because there's lots of streams and bits and pieces going on at the moment, and actually having a attention to detail, which us lead commentators normally do, wouldn't be a bad thing in terms of the quality that's getting put out there. So yeah, doing quite a few different bits and pieces, media coaching, rugby coaching, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, find me on Twitter, Instagram. I've got a website as well. So yeah, Johnny as in Walker, Hammond as in Organ. There you are.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that, Johnny. And just a reminder that you can find this podcast on YouTube, Spotify. It's pretty much on anywhere you get your podcast at the Hollow Sports Podcast. And we'll be back with you next week for another episode of the Rugby Room.